It's the Summer and Cynthia Show. Welcome back. Hello, hello, hello. Hi, Cynthia.
Good morning, Summer. How are you?
I am just peachy this November 1st. Can you believe it?
I can believe it. And that's actually some of the topic of what we're going to talk about today. And again, Summer Martin, me, Cynthia Bemis Abrams, two podcasters who just decided after a really fun recording, hey, we have a lot in common. And we also have a lot that isn't in common. And so that kind of makes us, an interesting match.
Yes.
Yeah, to have conversations about stuff. And lo and behold, every time I think, I ask a question, I'm thinking, oh, she's like me. I find out, no, she's not like me. And we kind of need more of that in this world because I will admit it, I'm living in a pretty curated environment right now.
Yeah.
I am pretty choosy about who I'm talking to, who I'm listening to. And that's not always the healthiest thing.
Yeah. I think you bring up a really good point, Cynthia, about we oftentimes get stuck in our own echo chambers. And while it's good at times, but in order to grow and learn, especially other perspectives, it's good to talk to people who don't necessarily agree with you on everything.
Yes.
So.
Or if it isn't even a point of agreement, bringing in a different perspective sometimes is enough for you to say, hey, you know what, there is a richer life out there, and there are many lives lived in these United States of America.
Absolutely.
So Summer and I were sort of thinking, well, okay, we're in this burgeoning YouTube channel, and we want to make it relevant, but also not, cause all sorts of triggers.
Yeah.
So it's November 1st, and a lot of people would know what they were doing 4 years ago. 5 years ago, Summer and I, the world was our oyster. She started her podcast, I was starting mine, The Unconventional Woman and Advanced TV Herstory. We just decided our voices, what we were interested in, it was worth it. And it's a lot of time. It's kind of an introverted, isolated experience producing podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
Then 4 years ago came along. And I think, and we'll speak to this, how did life change? How did our thinking change? And where are we 4 years later? And that's sort of what we're talking about for this episode. And then the next episode, we're going to talk about what do we think the future is going to look like? Because this is, wow, if ever there's been a time to reflect on what it is to be a woman in America, now is it. So in addition to however everyone felt, let's just start with Election Day. That period from Election Day until the Women's March. Summer, how is it feeling for you?
Oh, I get a little bit of PTSD, honestly. Election night, I went to bed early with the help of Benadryl because I did not want the emotional roller coaster. And while there was so much in terms of assumptions on who would win going in, it was just a lot of noise. So I went to bed early that night and woke up to the worst scenario ever. It was a dark day. And in fact, I went to work for a short amount of time. And even walking in, stepping off the elevator into the office, you can just see people peacocking a little bit. Their chests are out. And it was a horrible day. Sat down, booted up my computer, and about half an hour later, I was like, I can't do this. And I told my manager, I don't feel good, and I've got to go home. So we couldn't do work that day. Couldn't watch news. In fact, I wanted to pretty much drown myself in all the blackest things I could watch. So if for me, that was just what I wanted to do. And then after that, it was just kind of resentment towards the country. I felt betrayed. I was just like, is this really the response to having the first Black president? We decided to put this person in office, and it hurt. So fast forward through the rest of 2016 and into the new year, I understand there was a huge movement, huge uprising, and was proud for those who definitely participated. But for me, I wasn't ready to jump into that. I was just hurt. I was hurt and angry. And so I stayed home and just trying to figure out what the hell, how did we get here?
Yeah.
Um, and from that point on, it's just been, all right, let's go back to history and let's go learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I can tell you that Dave and I had just moved into Chicago, and we were down at a party slash fundraiser, an election night party fundraiser for the YWCA of Metropolitan Chicago, of which I was becoming a volunteer and stuff, and but just very interested in the whole organization. And the minute that the early results started rolling in, we were like, we are not going to be in any sort of mood to be with other people. We are political people. We've experienced many elections over the years, most of them nonpartisan, as activists. But nonpartisan still means good government. And
Sure.
so we headed home, and we went, we didn't really turn the TV on for too long, and then boom. Next morning, I was up at the crack of dawn because I was taking a plane from O'Hare to LaGuardia to see our daughter.
Mm.
And walking all the way through O'Hare, a very large airport, you could have heard a pin drop.
Yeah.
There was, even on the train going into the airport, it was quiet. There was just such a heavy in the air. Got off the plane, same in LaGuardia. Very, people were just very focused on what it was that they were doing, and there was nothing. And went through a subway station in New York, and there was a busker in the subway just playing the heaviest blues at 9:15 in the morning.
Yeah.
And again, all of transit was quiet, except for this very soulful, sorrowful music. And I videoed it. And it's on the old phone that Apple broke for me, so I don't really have it anymore.
Uh-huh.
What November and December brought for us? Well, from a personal perspective, it was enough for my son to recognize that it was time to go to law school, and he just graduated, and he's just been admitted to the bar of the state of Minnesota, because everybody perhaps saw that they weren't doing enough.
Right.
And that's not to be taken. If over the course of 4 years, some people who voted for the current president have finally seen and understood how delicate our country is and how important the rights and equity of everybody who lives here, how important that all is, well, great. Then we welcome your investment in the future of this country.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think a lot of minds were finally starting to wake up to the fact that we had taken an awful lot for granted.
Yeah.
And so then that got me to the Women's March, which I did attend in Chicago. And it was crazy, and it far exceeded expectations. And I think at that point in time, there was this other sense, you perhaps in Dallas thinking, or were you in Dallas? Yeah.
And there was definitely one here too. Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, wait a second. There's more people thinking the way I'm thinking. And they are as mad, if not, they have found what they need to say, and they're standing up on that podium and they are letting it fly. And I think that was also a turning point for a lot of women.
I hope so.
Yeah.
And now just to add too, you're right. After you get through the feels, because there's a grief period, very much, at least for me, there was a grief period. And so you go through the cycle of grief. And then as I was learning history, I did become more inspired to see what little nugget I can carve out into moving the needle, whether it is heightening your awareness, whether volunteering for campaigns and supporting people who are inspired to run, and even thinking about running myself, and just when I feel, the spirit is moving me to do so. But yes, it was definitely a pivotal moment in terms of we need more for our country. And it's outside of just self-interest,
Mm-hmm.
And I hope this time around, again, we've got to take care of all of us.
Yes.
And it's safe to assume that if I'm looking out for the well-being of all of us Americans, then automatically it's going to be good for me as well.
Mhm.
So I kind of hope that we shatter the myth of that self-voting interest, because right now, look what it's gotten us into.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah,
If I can ask,
yeah.
did your podcast change? Or, when you think about where your mind was at in 2015 and 16, did it, how has it evolved?
It has evolved a lot, because in the beginning, you're trying to figure out what your voice, what your show is going to be about. And then as you continue down this path, you just realize for me, there were other things I wanted to talk about. And so my subject matters changed dramatically. And definitely in the last 12 months, well, no, I'm going to say really this year, I've really shed the being self-conscious about what I'm saying, because what I found, I didn't want people at work to know about my show, so I didn't talk about it a lot. But now that's no longer, hanging above my head, I can speak freely. But I feel like, if I do feel blessed to have the platform I have, no matter what size it is, to be a little more careful, maybe not careful, because it wasn't that I was not careful before, but really leaning into my convictions and not shying away from things that may make my listeners uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Because, if you are my people, then you will accept, the highs and lows that comes with how I'm feeling. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's changed a lot. How about you?
Well, I'm going through it. I can't even recount all the incidents, the jarring incidents that have contributed to an awful lot of everyone's mindset changing. I think about Elizabeth Warren getting shouted down on the Senate floor, a United States senator representing the historic state of Massachusetts, and being told her time is up, and nevertheless she persisted. All of a sudden, we've got this persistence and the resistance, and Carrie Fisher's death. We won't even get into how that contributed to what we just decided we needed to become. I think about how we recognized and people said, if you don't speak up, you are complicit.
Yes.
On so many different things that we, particularly as white people, recognize, that we see that comes before us, and that we just have allowed to happen for too long.
Right.
So that notion of either I'm protecting myself, and that makes me complicit in this status quo, which is just, it's untenable.
Yeah. And I'll raise your Elizabeth Warren moment to Barack's moment during the State of the Union, his very first one.
Mm-hmm.
And when that congressman, I can't remember his name, yelled out, "You lie."
Yeah.
And really what a lot of us heard was, "You nigger."
Mm-hmm.
That's what we heard when he said that, the way he said it, the venom. I mean, none of us in our regular lives would ever heckle our boss as he gives a keynote, if you will. That would never happen.
A historic one at that, yes.
It would never happen. But that was the beginning of what I like to call the backlash of Barack Obama's presidency. So when you kind of step back and wonder, where did a Trump come from? It was definitely in line with there's order that has been disrupted.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we maintain that order? And we see a lot of that now leading into this election, from rigging the system to just straight up stealing it, beyond voter suppression. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting next 72 hours. And I'm just trying to figure out how I'm going to occupy myself.
Well, there's always baking, which is, I've been doing a lot of baking lately.
Yes, you have, actually.
I'll just sort of finish up, because these 4 years we've learned a lot, and I have learned a lot, and I've met a lot of people And I'm grateful for the network of women podcasters that we are a part of, the conversations that we have on the backside, because we recognize that because we know how to work audio and we have audiences that we can say things, and
Exactly.
we're getting better at it, and that's
We
pretty
are.
exciting, and it's very empowering.
Absolutely. And I think also, there's highs and lows with life. We all know that. It is not always sunshines and roses. But, with this show, we want to make a point to be cautious of what's going on in the world, what's going on with us, being authentic about that and sharing, our perspectives. And at the end of the day, there's way more, and I don't mean to sound cliche, but there's way more we have in common than not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will wrap up this particular question, because we want to keep these episodes kind of digestible. We've just laid a lot on your plate. But when I think about how my podcast has changed and what has happened to sort of fall under this cosmic umbrella of TV and women, I can't let this conversation go without talking about #MeToo and Time's Up and Let Her Work, and the recognition that women in the workplace and women of color in the workplace are doing such great work with such inequity, with so limited opportunity, and under some of the most toxic work conditions that are still happening in 2020. But guess what? It's not just even in entertainment. It's still in STEM fields and law enforcement. And
I challenge you to find a woman or young girl who hasn't had an experience with sexual harassment.
Right. And so we've gotten smarter about that, and we need to keep telling the stories. And however it is that, I started the podcast kind of thinking, I just want to tell, the stories. And then I'm finding out that so many of these women who were icons did in fact have just the most horrific circumstances put at them. And then you read their biographies or their autobiographies, or you somehow get some information. And I'm looking at it with a much more forgiving eye. I continue to sort of find the context, but I hit the Lena Hornes and the Judy Garlands and the Elizabeth Taylors of the world, and I just have this newfound respect for what they had to endure, and the fact that so many of those stories that are now part of what you see on the library shelf are written by men. And I think to myself, is it because women can't afford to set up their lives to write a book, and therefore that entire notion of of telling these stories through our canon, through our voices, is totally lost? And so I don't know. We'll talk about the future in this next episode, but these 4 years have just been it's been a whirlwind, and it's been such an eye-opener, and it's an opportunity to have witnessed history while also trying to make some sense of it for my listeners.
Yes, well said. Well said. I agree.
All right. Do you want to ask the kind listeners to subscribe to us?
Yes, if you feel compelled to do so, we would love to have you stick around and always stay connected with us. So please, that button down there, push it. And even let's raise the stakes. Let's say you subscribe and you are really digging the show. Guess what? Sharing is caring. You should tell someone else about the show as well. Share the link and keep rocking with us. We're so happy to have you here.
And sharing is bearing, and sharing is pairing. And I could go on all day, but I won't. Thanks for watching, Summer and Cynthia.
Peace.